He stood in a glass palace of chrome and marble, a man whose wealth had taught him to expect the world to bow. Winter light spilled through the showroom like cold water, glazing the red paint of a silent Ferrari that sat perched on a turntable. Trophy, with a heartbeat gone missing. The millionaire's voice slid across the room like a blade wrapped in silk. "I'll give you the Ferrari, if you make it run." The laughter that followed was practiced and expensive, polished by years of rooms where cruelty wore a tuxedo. He said it to a black man in a faded work jacket, a man with oil under his nails and dignity in his spine. The tone was not a challenge but a humiliation neatly folded into a dare, the sort that assumes some people are furniture and others are kings. He tossed the key fob to the floor. It skittered past a velvet rope and came to rest against the gleaming tire. The crowd watched for sport. The man in the jacket did not flinch. He bent, picked up the key as though retrieving a fallen truth, and stood quietly in a world that had already judged him. What happened next would change everything. He had come for something small and necessary, not for spectacle. His name was Isaiah Reed, a name spoken soft by his mother, a name the city knew in whispers because he kept cars, and sometimes people alive when the night had taken too much. He ran a narrow garage under a woven canopy of viaducts, where trains shook rust down like red snow when hope arrived on foot. On paper, his business was scrap-thin. 4 bays, 2 lifts, a dented coffee machine, and an old clock that ticked loud when the winter wind crawled under the door. In truth, it was a sanctuary dressed as a shop. Boys who had been told they were problems learned to hold a torque wrench like a promise. Girls who'd been laughed out of classrooms learned to measure clearances with the precision of surgeons. They wore hand-me-down coveralls and carried futures in their pockets like fragile glass. Isaiah taught them to listen to engines with the ears of a musician, and to listen to people with the patience of a chaplain. He bought textbooks from thrift stores, and built a library on a shelf alongside gasket sealer and brake cleaner. Refused the cheap religion of despair. He believed in spark. The invitation arrived on cheap paper for a rich event, a charity auction that sold redemption by the seat and status by the sip. Mobility Futures Gala, the embossed letters sighed, as if change could be rented by the hour. A donor had sent Isaiah a ticket with a note that said, "You should be seen." He smiled at that. Seen is a tricky word in a city where some people melt into a blur no matter how hard they try to stand still. He put on his cleanest jacket and shined his boots with motor oil, because polish is polish when you have more courage than cash. He hoped to win a used cargo van the bank had repossessed from a florist. With a van, his students could deliver finished jobs, pick up parts, show up to internships dry on rainy days. A van is dignity on wheels. He walked into marble and light, and the sound of money clinking like ice. He whispered a hello to the silent Ferrari and felt, not intimidation but recognition. An engine is an engine, whether it sleeps under a velvet rope or under a hood held by a broomstick. The millionaire was named Victor Lan, the sort of name that appears in magazine profiles beside photos of watches and private runways. He had a smile, practiced in front of mirrors and a habit of speaking in sentences that sounded like contracts. Victor collected fast objects and slow apologies. He called it curation. Others called it conquest. The Ferrari was his latest acquisition, a pedigreed creature flown in from a climate-controlled stable on the other side of the ocean. The air freight cost enough to feed a city block for a month. Somewhere over the Atlantic, or perhaps on the truck that carried it across lowlands and through fog, the car had fallen silent. It would not start. The dignified death of an expensive thing had left Victor agitated and embarrassed. He hired a specialist, then another. He rattled the key at dawn and dusk as if impatience alone could coax combustion. Nothing. He decided to make a spectacle out of a dead engine rather than a confession out of his ignorance. That is how some men hide. Isaiah stood at the rope, studying the car the way a mother reads a child's face after a long day. His glance was not a thief's yearning, but a craftsman's inquiry. He noticed small truths others had missed. A faint dusting on the tailpipes that suggested brief life since arrival, the almost invisible fingerprint on the rear clamshell, where someone unfamiliar had tried to coax access, the way the key fob lagged in transmitting, hinting at a battery older than its case. He asked a nearby attendant quietly if he could look closer. The attendant, who had been trained to serve champagne and a smile to those who wore the right names, glanced at Isaiah's jacket and then at Victor. It took one heartbeat too long for permission. In that heartbeat, something ugly woke in the room. Victor turned toward Isaiah, as if noticing a squeak in the floor. He tilted his head, let his eyes travel over Isaiah's jacket, paused at the oil-blackened cuffs with the delicate distaste of a man who had always bought his cleanliness in bulk. "You like the car?" he asked. Isaiah nodded. "It's beautiful," he said. "The Millionaire's." Lips curved in a muse's smirk. "And you are?" Isaiah offered his name, offered his hand. Victor lifted an eyebrow, not his hand. "Mechani?" he asked, letting the word swing like a tired insult. "Teacher, too," Isaiah said. Victor's laugh was gentle and designed to wound without leaving fingerprints. "Teacher? Of what?" "Patience," Isaiah replied, "and engines when patience listens long enough." A circle formed the way circles always form when cruelty begins to perform. Some came to see a joke, some came because they smelled the possibility of blood. The fundraiser's host, a man who could pronounce accountability as if it were an hors d'oeuvre, hovered with concern that the evening script was wobbling. Victor flourished the dead key fob like a magician about to make empathy disappear. "The engine won't start," he announced. "The best people have tried." He saw Isaiah seeing the car and recognized, not kinship, but a stage. "I'll give you the Ferrari if you make it run," he said. It was not generosity. It was a bet placed with house money because the house had written the rules. The crowd exhaled a single gasp and then fell into the comfortable furniture of laughter. This is what humiliation looks like in tuxedos, a dare wrapped as a gift, a sneer folded small enough to fit in a silk pocket. Isaiah did not blink. He did not look at the cameras, or the watch faces, or the faces that might as well have been watchers. He looked at the car. He bent to pick up the key fob where it had skittered to a stop, and when his fingers touched it, he held it the way a priest holds a wafer. He asked for no tools. He asked for permission to step across the rope and to open the rear clamshell. He received a nod seasoned with reluctance. He stood behind the Ferrari and listened. This is what people never understand about those who fix things for a living. The first tool is not in the hand, it is in the ear. He turned the key. Silence. But silence holds information for those who know its power. Alphabet. He noted which warnings blinked and which did not. He watched the tachometer's needle quiver a fraction and fall. He smelled a faint sweetness near the battery panel, the sugar burn of an aging fuse. He asked for nothing. He reached into his pocket and found a coin, the dull silver face of a state quarter smoothed by 100 exchanges. He waited for the security man to say, "Sir, don't," and when he did, Isaiah's voice was softer than the rule. "Please." The security man, who had also known nights when hope arrived on foot, pretended not to see. Isaiah traced the grounding strap with his eye, and then his hand, the braided metal that tied the batteries promised to the body's truth. He saw corrosion hiding like mold under a sleeve. Near the frame, honest rot disguised as health. He knew what salt does when it shakes hands with time. He worked the sleeve back, slow, careful, and revealed a seam of green-blue powder. He scraped gently with the edge of the quarter, not violently, not in a way that would turn repair into breakage. He breathed on the connection and remembered his mother blowing patiently on soup, so her children would not burn their mouths on hunger's eagerness. He tightened what could be tightened by hand and hope. He turned the key again, not expecting the miracle yet, listening for a different silence. He heard the faintest click of a relay behind the passenger seat, a shy acknowledgement, a whisper of electricity shyly asked to dance. He closed his eyes and saw the car's wiring diagram the way some people see constellations. He had studied them in books he could barely afford, copying pages by hand in late-night quiet while trains ironed the dark. He breathed in the soft smell of treated leather and old voltage. He pressed a small recessed button near the bulkhead, an inertia switch disguised to the unfamiliar as a nameless fastener, designed to cut fuel in a crash, and sometimes jostled dumb by a rough crossing. He waited. He turned the key halfway, let the system wake, like a child who needs gentleness, not shouting. The dash lit, a little steadier. He thumbed the fob again, then slid it against the column so that tired batteries could kiss their target without having to shout. Across the air. He heard the fuel pump cough, a stifled clearing of a throat that had been ignored. The millionaire spoke into the quiet, the way a man throws stones into a well. "This is charming," he murmured, the words buttered. "We can get you a job. Wiping the tires when you're done." Laughter again, the kind that scrapes paint off kindness. Isaiah did not look up. He pressed the throttle pedal twice, 2 soft invitations, and then turned the key all the way. For a breath, nothing. Then, a low growl, almost imperceptible, like a storm beginning beyond a hill. Another turn, less hesitation now, as if the car remembered a song it had loved. The engine coughed, caught, died, because pride is never fixed in a single heartbeat. Isaiah did not rush, and therein was the sermon. He waited, pressed the throttle once, sent a message that said, "I am here. You are safe to wake." He turned the key. The engine took air into its lungs, wavered, found itself. It rose from silence with the unashamed roar of an animal that knows its purpose. The room jumped. The glass trembled. It was not merely sound. It was vindication harnessed to pistons, a choir carved from metal and fire. The Ferrari ran. Silence fell harder than the roar. The crowd stared, as if the truth had removed its mask, as if a myth had walked into the room wearing work boots. Something broke open in the space between marble columns and velvet ropes, a seam of stunned humanity in a place built to prevent such leaks. Isaiah let the engine idle, listening for misfires, for the kind of tremors that mean a future apology. He tuned the throttle by ear, the way a father hums a child back to sleep. He made no speeches. He lifted his hand and rested it above the engine without touching, feeling heat turn from threat to warmth. He eased the key out. The engine sighed and fell to quiet like a stage after the curtain. Victor Lang had the decency, or perhaps only the inability, to be speechless for a moment. He stepped forward, his reflection swimming in the Ferrari's paint like a man looking down and seeing a stranger in the water. "What would you—" he began, then started again. "The agreement stands," he said, which was both bravado and hope that the rule of contracts would work. "Rescue his pride from drowning. The Ferrari is yours." He was certain that money could cauterize the wound he had made, that handing over an object would balance a scale he had been loading for years. He didn't understand that some scales measure weight differently. Isaiah looked at the car, then at his hands, then at the eyes around him, eyes that contained 1,000 stories, some of which were learning in real time how to be better stories. He shook his head, and it was not a gesture of fear but of freedom. "I don't want your car," he said. A murmur lapped the room. The word "don't" floated like a leaf on strange water. He continued, voice steady. "What I want costs more than this car, and less than your pride. I want internships for my sake. Students in the shops where decisions get made, not just where the floors get swept. I want paid apprenticeships with health insurance and a path to certification, not a pat on the head and a photo for your year-end report. I want you to fund a second lift for our garage, a diagnostic scanner that isn't older than the kids using it, and a used van that runs on mornings when the buses don't. I want your word that next time you see a kid in a jacket like mine, you won't speak to him like a prop in your play. I want an apology, Not just to me, but to every person in this room you trained to laugh on command. Those words landed with a gravity that marble could not deflect. Some in the room looked down at their shoes and saw the price tags of their own silence. The host fumbled his note cards as if the script had caught fire. Victor's face did something unfamiliar. It learned how to be human. The first tear did not form because of shame or because of being wrong in public. Formed because, for the first time in a long time, he heard the whole chord of his life, dissonance and awe. He looked like a boy who had broken a thing he could not afford to fix. He said, "My father taught me to make sure no one ever did to me what they did to him, and I built a fortress and forgot to leave a door." He cleared his throat, swallowed a century and said, "I'm sorry, Isaiah." He said it like an engine starting for the first time in winter, raw, unpracticed, but trying. The room shifted. People who were excellent at writing checks for their names began to consider writing checks for someone else's future. A woman in a navy suit with an engineer's posture stepped forward, a badge clipped to her waistband with a logo that meant she had spent years where metal becomes story. "I'm Dana," she said to Isaiah. "Powertrain chief on a team that could use the kind of listening you just did. We have 8 slots for summer apprenticeships. We can make them 12 if your kids are ready to learn and if we are ready to learn too." Another hand rose, then another. A parts distributor offered tools. A fleet manager offered internships with union mentorship. A bank officer began to speak, and then closed his mouth, hearing his own vocabulary curdle inside him, and tried again with a voice that had no reheated jargon. "We have been part of the problem. We can be part of the repair." He pledged microloans and a program to underwrite talent instead of distrust. A poet in a cheap dress on the balcony began to cry, not because of the car, but because the room had finally become a place where truth could afford to stand. Victor looked at the car, and then at the people gathered in a circle that felt, for once, like communion, rather than theater. He lifted the key fob, no longer a weapon, merely a key, and held it toward Isaiah. "Keep it for the night," he said, voice quiet. "Not as a prize, as a reminder." Isaiah shook his head, smiling in a way that untied a knot in everyone's chest. "I don't need the reminder," he said. "I wake up to it every day. Give the car to the foundation. Auction it again, but this time, auction less of your soul. Make the proceeds fund apprenticeships, vans, second chances. Build a bay in my shop with a plaque, not with my name, but with the names of the kids who will stand there and become the kind of people who make engines sing and streets quieter and futures possible." The room breathed out. Something like church rippled through space that had been designed to worship objects. After the apologies came signatures, because meaning without mechanism is a coat without sleeves. Victor took a pen whose price could have paid Isaiah's heat bill for a winter and wrote numbers he had never written for anyone who could not return them with interest. He called his lawyer and told him to draw up the papers, but not the kind that trade an image for a tax write-off. The kind that move money into hands that transform it into mornings, that arrive without dread. He told his assistant to rework his calendar to include afternoons at the garage, not for a photo, but for listening. He did not demand forgiveness. He understood that forgiveness is a door other people open when they are ready, not a lever he could pull to feel clean. He let the night sit heavy on him, and chose not to shrug it off. That was new. Isaiah walked outside when the event ended, and the winter air remembered how to bite. He stood under the awning with the man who had pretended not to see him earlier, the security guard whose quiet became an ally. "Thank you," Isaiah said. "For what?" the guard asked, ashamed of all the sirs he had been forced to say in a life that prized uniforms over souls. "For knowing how much permission weighs," Isaiah answered. They stood together without a script. Above them, lights hummed. Across the street, a bus sighed, opened its doors, and swallowed a little line of weary people who were returning to apartments where dinner Was a question, and love was an answer that kept showing up anyway. People will ask what Isaiah was before he became the man who made the room bend. They will look for a pedigree, a degree, a certificate that absolves their doubt. They will want to discover that he once worked in a factory that made engines like this one, or that he designed the map that taught a computer to sing fire into cylinders, or that his talent was blessed by some institution whose name sounds like a passport. Those things might be true, or they might not. The truth that mattered lived elsewhere. It lived in nights when he fell asleep at a library table under fluorescent light, a repair manual as his pillow, because the heat at home was a rumor. It lived in mornings when he walked 3 miles because the bus stop had become a lecture in contempt. It lived in every time someone told him what he was and he smiled and proved them wrong without making proving them wrong his religion. Some people wait their whole lives to be crowned by an institution. Some people crown themselves with work that makes other people's lives a little easier to live. That was Isaiah's lineage. In the weeks that followed, the showroom's marble reflected a different kind of a light day. The Ferrari returned to the auction block, not as a prop in a lesson about power, but as a seed. The bids climbed, fueled by something that smelled fresher than greed. The car sold for more than it had cost, and the line items the money wrote into the world were the kind that last far longer than the warmth of applause. A second lift rose in Isaiah's shop, a steel arm that hoisted not just cars but possibilities. A van arrived, white paint dull with kindness, seats reconfigured to carry tool chests and futures. Apprentices clocked in and discovered that the first 10 minutes of their day was set aside for reading. A page from a manual, a paragraph from Baldwin, a stanza from a poem that taught them to see. A boy who had been taught to clench his jaw learned to breathe through frustrations as if his lungs were bellows and patience was a flame needing air. A girl who had been told her hands were too soft to turn bolts found torque in her wrist and confidence in her chest. A man who had been a security guard taught a seminar on ethics for people who hold keys to other people's property. The city did not transform overnight, but the morning, in certain blocks, tasted different. Victor kept his word. He sat on a milk crate in Isaiah's garage, while the winter wind tried and failed to bully its way under the door. He learned what it meant to be called sir, without the rust of fear underneath. He asked questions with no press release attending. He wrote checks without posting their photos. He stood beside a 17-year-old who was deciding between college and a job, and understood that sometimes a steady paycheck today is not an enemy of a diploma tomorrow, if the right bridge exists. He learned to take off his watch at the threshold, because time in that room moved on a different clock. He realized, not without pain, that the way he had been taught to be a man had cost other people breath. He practiced new ways. They did not fit at first. He kept wearing them anyway. He made mistakes, and was corrected and learned how to be corrected without shrinking into shame or puffing into defense. That, too, was new. And Isaiah, what did he gain? People will say power, as if power is the same thing as freedom. They will say recognition, as if recognition is a sturdy enough house to live in. He gained students who looked at their own hands and saw instruments of mercy. He gained a city council that learned the shape of his voice and allowed it to echo past the 3-minute timer most voices are granted. He gained time bought by resources that allowed him to teach without calculating how much sleep he could afford to lose. He gained, most of all, the pleasure of hearing the sound an engine makes when it returns from the dead, and knowing that sometimes people can do the same. Do not mistake this for a fairy tale. There were still mornings when racism uncoiled itself on sidewalks and in boardrooms, like an old snake that had not forgotten where to hide. There were still banks that liked the music of no more than the music of yes. There were still grown men who needed to perform their safety by belittling someone else's soul. But a tiny shift in gravity had occurred in one room on one winter night, And sometimes gravity is all that's needed to roll a stone in a different direction. Isaiah's students began to show up in places where they had previously been invisible, except as a statistic someone mentioned when fundraising required urgency. A young woman from the shop earned a scholarship to study mechanical engineering and returned to teach a summer course called Listening to Machines, Listening to Each Other. A young man led a team that retrofitted city buses with sensors that caught problems before they became breakdowns. He said that if we can keep metal from quitting early, maybe we can help people do the same. As for the Ferrari, it appears now and then at parades and on summer nights when the city closes a street for music and memory. It roars past barbershops and bakeries, past stoops where old men trade stories like currency and children practice flight with chalk and jump ropes. Isaiah sometimes stands with his hands in his jacket and watches it pass, smile playing around his mouth like the echo of a song he loves. He does not own it, but in a way that matters more, he does. He owns the piece of its story that saved a room from itself. He owns the sound it made when dignity won. What, then, is the lesson, if we must name it to carry it? Do not judge a man by the quiet of his clothes or the music of your own assumptions. Respect is not a garnish for the rich to sprinkle on the poor when the cameras arrive. Dignity does not live in leather seats or in marble floors. It lives in how we talk to the person wiping those floors and in whether we know their name. Justice is not a debt we pay once with a dramatic gesture. It is a daily maintenance schedule, unglamorous and non-negotiable. Expertise often wears plain garments. Genius can smell like solvent and carry a set of keys that open doors you didn't know were locked. And when someone asks for apprenticeships instead of applause, believe them when they say that changing a life is the only life is. Trophy worth lifting. If this story touched your heart, take it with you into the rooms where you laugh, into the rooms where you hire, into the rooms where your voice can make a cruel moment soften into a lesson that makes all of us more human. Share it with someone who has forgotten that engines and people both run best when connections are clean and grounds are sound. Like this story, if it made you feel the tremor of recognition, the knowledge that every day you hold a key fob to someone else's sense of worth. Subscribe if you want more stories that do not flinch from pain and do not apologize for hope. Stories that take you by the hand and lead you into the rooms where change is not a speech, but a practiced craft. Because every story hides a truth, and every truth deserves to be heard.